In 1792 there was enthusiasm to build a canal from Leicester to Northampton. This would link the Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire coalfields to London. By 1795 the first canal section was completed, but due to financial difficulties work had come to a halt at Debdale, with Northampton some 18 miles further south. This film will tell the story of how the canal was built, linking Debdale to the Grand Junction Canal at the start of the 1800s, and to celebrate the 200th anniversary of this opening. Work from Debdale resumed in 1803, but rising costs gave the company directors cold feet. They proposed ending the line at Harborough. This section opened in 1809 with a celebration dinner at the Angel Hotel in Market Harborough. The Grand Junction Company became interested in completing the link to their waterway, and in 1809 they looked at plans previously put forward by the renowned canal engineers James Barnes and Thomas Telford. Telford proposed taking the canal on through Market Harborough, crossing the Welland Valley by an aqueduct. It would then continue through Farndon, Great Oxenden and Ardingworth, where a 6-mile branch line would split off to Rusden. This main line would continue through Cottersbrook and Holdenby to join the Grand Junction Canal at Buckby Wharf. However, Barnes rejected this as too expensive because of the proposed tunnels and aqueducts needed to cover this hilly country. Instead, he proposed building the canal as level as possible from Foxton along the Lawton Hills, through Husbands Bosworth, Yelvertoft, Crick, Watford, and joining the Grand Junction Canal at Norton Junction. He also proposed that the Harborough section would in effect become a branch of the main canal. After much deliberation, the Grand Junction Company decided that the Barnes proposal was the most favourable. In May 1810, work began. Benjamin Bevan, an experienced engineer, was appointed head of the project. At Foxton, they could have built a tunnel through to the Welland Valley, but that would have been one of the longest canal tunnels in the country, a lot of hard work and very costly. So Benjamin Bevan came up with a plan to lift the canal 75 feet by means of 10 locks in 2 staircases and take it 20 miles to the south to Watford, back down the hill via another 7 locks and join up with the Grand Junction Canal at Norton. It's a good climb up this hill, and here at the very top is the 3rd highest piece of canal in Britain. As there are few hills above it to supply water, it was decided to have narrow locks instead of wide ones. By June 1812, the stretch of the canal from the top of the locks to Husbands Bosworth cutting was open, a distance of about 5 miles, and by the 1st of October 1812, Foxton locks were finished. The section to Husbands Bosworth was constructed level following the contours around the Lawton Hills. At 20 miles, this pound is one of the longest stretches of level navigation in the whole canal system. In order to maintain the level, 2 proposed tunnels at Husbands Bosworth and Crick were necessary. This is Bosworth, close to the village of Husbands Bosworth. It is 1,170 yards long, or about 1,070 metres in today's money. Bright hues of the brickwork reflect the local red clays from which the canals were made. The bricks were made locally and bought by canal. It is estimated that from 1811 some 350 men were working on the project. 8 shafts were used during the construction of the tunnel, but unlike railway tunnels, these would be filled in and not used for ventilation. The brickwork was finished on the 29th of April 1813, an impressive feat of civil engineering and almost complete lack of mechanisation available at the time. Construction was not without problems. Water constantly flooded into the middle three working shafts. Eventually, a steam engine had to be purchased to pump the water out. The tunnel lies beneath the Market Harborough to Rugby railway line, which closed in 1966. The railway is crossed by a bridge for the towpath where the horses walked, whilst the boatmen legged the boat through the tunnel. At the Honeypot Lane end of the tunnel, a corrugated iron fence was erected so that trains didn't spook the horses. The Welford Arm begins at Bridge 42, which is a roving bridge. While the main canal continues on its way to Norton, over 15 miles away, we shall travel up the Welford Arm, a 1 3/4 mile journey. There are 3 bridges on the Arm, the last being a relatively new footbridge which replaced the old brick one. The nearby Welford Lock raises the canal to the short pound into Welford Wharf and the marina. The Wharf Inn, formerly the George Inn, marks the end of the Arm. Across the road and up the hill lies the reservoir which feeds the canal. When water is needed, a paddle gate is opened and water gushes down the hill into the Arm and ultimately into the main canal. By May 1813, the canal had reached Stamford. The 11 miles of canal from Foxton was now open to traffic. Construction was now being done at both ends, but Bevan found quicksand and other poor strata on the line of the proposed canal here at Crick. The original line was abandoned and a new revised route to the east of the village was implemented. Constructing canals in the early 1800s was fraught with danger. Inevitably accidents occurred and workers were hurt, but during the construction of the Crick Tunnel, tragedy struck when a navvy was killed after falling down a shaft. The Crick Tunnel was finally completed in 1814. It is 1,520 yards long, or about 1,400 metres, and because of the dripping water is known as a wet tunnel. Some say the Crick Tunnel is haunted. The dripping water from the walls combined with the darkness certainly gives a spooky feel, although Walter Gubbins, a well-known boatman who legged it through the tunnel many times, is scornful of such stories. The canal was finally finished on the 9th of August 1814. It had taken over 4 years of blood, sweat and tears to complete. A magnificent opening ceremony where the grand procession of boats was planned from Norton to Market Harborough, a distance of 29 miles. At Harborough, a sumptuous dinner was provided by Joseph Craddock of Gumley Hall, with turtle, venison, turbot and many other delicious dishes. One of the problems of the line that the locks were built narrow. This was to save money and water. Here at Watford they needed 7 locks, 4 of which are in a staircase. From its opening in 1814 until the 1830s, the line was reasonably profitable, but from 1837 decline set in, with a particularly sharp drop in 1851. As the Grand Union was in a worse state, it was decided that they would work together, virtually becoming one company. Trade continued to decline, hitting all canal companies due to the expansion of the railways and the increased amount of freight moving over to this significantly faster and increasingly cheaper means of transport. Market Harborough, for instance, had 4 rail companies operating at its station with lines to Rugby, Northampton, Leicester, Peterborough and Melton Mowbray by the 1860s. In 1893 it was decided to hold a meeting to see what could be done to improve matters. The company, Fellows Morton and Clayton, known as FMC, proposed that steamers be put on to compete with other forms of transport. This would mean dredging both the canals and widening the locks at Watford and Foxton. The narrow locks issue had returned to haunt them. However, the Grand Junction Canal Company decided to buy up the LNU and the old Grand Union in 1894 for £17,000, a cheap price and a bargain, but only if the canals could be made profitable once more. Dredging of the canals began immediately and continued over the next 10 years, but the problem of the narrow locks remained. The canal was never as deep as the Grand Junction, and 20 tons would be the limit of loading for a narrowboat. In 1896 it was decided to build an inclined plane boat lift at Foxton to replace the 10 locks. This would be capable of taking 70-ton barge or a pair of narrowboats from the bottom to the top and vice versa in 12 minutes, compared with a minimum of 45 minutes through the locks. Several hours if there was a lot of traffic. It would also use a lot less water, which was often a problem with the locks. The Grand Junction Canal Company engineer Gordon Cale Thomas was put in charge of the project, and it was formally opened in 1900. The lift consisted of 2 tanks, counterbalanced, linked by wire ropes. A 25 horsepower steam winch wound the ropes onto one side of its drum and simultaneously let it off the other, raising and lowering the tank. Each tank was full of water and weighed 230 tons, with or without a boat. The total rise was 75 feet, the same as the locks. Boats would be floated into the tank. The operator would then close the gate and signal the engine room with the ship's telegraph. The driver turned the engine on and tanks changed places. The descending tank simply sank into the water at the bottom where the gate is opened, letting the boat into the canal system once again. The weight of the bottom tank is then taken by the water and the counterbalance is lost. To compensate for the now heavier rising tank, extra wheels came into contact with the extra rails either side of the normal track to keep it level, whilst the angle of slope decreased so that no extra power is needed. Once at the top, hydraulic rams push the tank against the upper canal and form a water seal. The gates can then be opened. The horse can now be reattached and the boat continues its journey. FMC's promise of increased traffic never materialised. The inclined plane only operated for just over 10 years and in 1911 was mothballed to save money. The company said that we would reopen when things get better. The lift didn't work at night. Horse boats tended to stop because the horses needed their rest. In 1909 FMC was working their steamboats fly, which meant the non-stop 24-hour journey. To accommodate these flyboats, the locks were restored for night use. The lift closed due to the need for substantial maintenance, probably replacing the wire ropes and the cost of keeping the lift in steam with a minimum of 3 operators. The fact that a fully working set of locks was available alongside the lift would not have helped. The lift was maintained for a few years, but sank into slow decline, and in 1928 the machinery was finally sold for scrap. Between the wars, trade declined, particularly in the 1930s Great Depression. On the 1st of January 1929, the Grand Junction, including our Grand Union, amalgamated with others to become the Grand Union Canal, which is why we call our bit the old Grand Union. The rise in the motor lorry traffic, especially after the Second World War, had a further effect by switching freight not only from canals to rail but also to the roads. There was a brief revival during the Second World War, and in 1947 the waterways were nationalised. But it was not enough to save the canal as a commercial carrier. By 1956 regular trade had all but vanished from the route and the canal remained in poor condition. The mainline traffic continued into the 1960s. The opening of the motorways and the lifting of speed limits for lorries allowed fast door-to-door transport, taking traffic from canals and railways. By the 1950s, the canal system was at its lowest ebb. However, the initial stages of the revival began when the first National Boat Rally was held at Harborough Basin in 1950. This was organised by the Inland Waterways Association, founded in 1946. The rally attracted considerable publicity, and this in turn led to increased interest in canals for pleasure cruising and other leisure activities. Today, the old Grand Union Canal is one of the most beautiful and tranquil sections of the English waterways, popular with boaters with its 20-mile lock £3 between Foxton and Watford. The countryside it passed through is mainly rural and relatively unspoilt, affording a relaxed boating experience. Today we see the evolution of the old Grand Union from a once commercial and industrial transport system into a leisure activity catering for the whims and fancies of boaters for all ages and experience.